Andrew,
Yeah.
I think that this is the questionnaire or the little chat that people have been waiting for, and I'm really excited to obviously share maybe more depth about your journey and how Moonward has started, and what happened along the way, the ups, the downs, and all those sorts of in-betweens as well. I know that it's really a big part of our hiring process is that we're always sharing with everyone, what the story is of Moonward. And also when we're onboarding our clients, we really like to tell people, your journey, because it's so relatable to what they're experiencing. And I think that this is going to be a really great opportunity for us to dive deeper into, what this actually looked like, and what happened along the way. So I think that maybe we could just start from the start, really. And I know that we always share with our clients, that we actually built our own app in the beginning. So maybe talk to us about the app.
Absolutely. So I remember I was working in essentially a sales role. So I was working in a sales role, and I was fortunate enough to be traveling around New Zealand. So I was essentially going to a new city pretty much every single week or every single fortnight, and sort of in this sort of very sort of salesy type role where we were dealing a lot with businesses all over the country. So it was quite a fast-paced, full-on role, very sort of commission-based. So you're essentially the amount you earned was based on how hard you worked, which I liked because it's sort of that type of role suited me quite well, because I was very comfortable putting in the time and energy required to get the rewards. So at this point I was probably maybe 18, 19, but I was still very much working for the man, as they say, because what was happening as I was putting all of this time and energy into this sales role, I would see every single week a large proportion, the majority of all my hard work go into my boss's pocket, let's say. And what happened at that point in time is I was sort of thinking through ideas and concepts in the back of my mind, because it was very much like a traveling role. I would get back to our hotel or a motel that we were staying in, and in the evenings I would work on my own thing. And what happened is I'd sort of been exploring the mobile app space. Mind you, this is maybe 6-7 years ago, so it wasn't as I guess big as it is now. And I was exploring the mobile app space, and one night had the next big thought, the next big idea, which essentially built a little bit of a snowball effect to what happened next, I guess.
I think let's rewind that back a little bit, because I don't know if that was mentioned as well, but you were only 18 or 19 at this point, so very young. Maybe let's talk about a little bit more about little Andrew, young Andrew.
Yeah, for sure. So like many people, I guess if we wind it all the way back, I was very much your average Joe at high school. Average at pretty much everything. School grades were average, sporting success was average, and I was pretty much like the average guy at high school. And I didn't really have an idea on what I wanted to do. So I made the mistake of listening to a lot of my teachers who were, very encouraging to go on to university, but I didn't really have a true passion for what I wanted to study. I went, and I think I did about 1.5 years of university. Never really fell in love with it. It was never really my thing. I hadn't really enjoyed high school or a school environment. So to go from a school or that sort of classroom environment straight onto university probably wasn't the best idea. And to, I guess, factor in that I didn't really have a passion at that point in time, I was sort of setting myself up to fail. But as I say, you don't know what you don't know. So went from high school where I was average Joe straight into university where, I was studying things which I didn't really have a true passion for, but I was trying to tell myself, like, just dig it in, a couple more years and you'll get a degree and the world will open up from there. But it's very hard to put a lot of time and energy into something that you don't really enjoy. So that's essentially what it is. Average at high school, and then went on to study a year and a bit at university in a course that didn't really light me up.
And I think that that's something that a lot of our team members and a lot of our clients wouldn't know is like the average Andrew, because I think when they think of you now, they think of you as someone who's very passionate about tech. So let's go back to your sales role, and you were thinking about this app idea and everything was starting to snowball.
Yeah.
And where did you feel the spark of passion? Where did this start?
Yeah, so I think it actually started when I was at uni. So what happened, I was at uni, and like I said, at this point in time I was actually studying a history degree, of all things. And I remember it got towards the end of the year where you start to think about exams. And one of my mates at the time said that he was working for this company who was looking for salespeople. And at no point had I ever done any form of sales, any form of marketing. I hadn't even done a proper job really at that point in time. But I said, you know what? I need a bit of money on the side, I'll give it a go. And I think that sales role was probably the first time I actually truly enjoyed something since, say, we all enjoy playing sports and whatnot, or whatever it is. But that's probably the first time I've truly enjoyed something and realized that I can change direction in my life, and I can have control of what my next step is, or dare I say it, what my destiny is. So once I got that opportunity in that sales role, it really changed my perspective. And I think my vision sort of widened at that point in time, and I noticed there was a lot more potential to myself.
And I think it could be good to kind of set the scene about Palmerston North, because I think that we always talk about the environment that you are kind of in, and as you said, 7 years ago apps were not a thing. I remember when we were starting out, the apps that were around was Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and there definitely wasn't any other apps really that were out there.
Yeah, for sure. And you're exactly right, and that's essentially what sort of sparked the next step. So I was in that hotel room when I was working, and how it usually used to work was I'd go spend a week away in a different city in New Zealand, and then I'll come home for the weekends, and that's usually where I'll pick up a little bit more of my own personal stuff. So I was back in Palmerston North, and what I was noticing is I was traveling during the week and seeing these cool places, and then always coming back to Palmerston North where I was supposedly spending my time to be inspired and figure out this cool idea I've got. And at that point in time, I didn't know how to code or how to build an app. So what I was doing is I was reaching out to local app developers to try and find someone to help me. And what happened is I soon realized that at that point in time, everyone in the app development space was either extremely demotivating, a little bit arrogant, and they just wouldn't give you the time of the day. And I thought, surely this isn't the only way. And hence the reason from there, I sort of discovered a way on how I could actually build out this idea and build out this app myself.
So I think that that's actually a really good point as well. A lot of these app developers during this time were very demotivating. I know that they had a lot of technical jargon, which, for someone who is 18, 19 is just completely over your head. And I know that they were extremely expensive as well. So you kind of found your own way that you could develop this app for a lot less. And just walk us through that a little bit.
Well, essentially figured out how to build it myself. You're exactly right. I was 18, 19, essentially a uni dropout at that point in time, who I didn't really have much money at all, albeit the job I was having was going okay. I definitely didn't have enough to afford to develop an app from scratch at that point in time. So I figured out a way to get the app up and running and sort of like self-taught a little bit of app design, a little bit of very basic sort of UI UX design as well, and got the bones of my initial app up and running. Probably spent maybe 3 to 4 weeks just building out the actual app itself, whilst I was still working and doing a bit of stuff in the background. But it got to a point where the app was like ready to go, and I was sort of at like a little bit of a crossroads at that point.
So what was the crossroads?
So I'm the type of guy that if I really like something, I'll jump all in. So what had happened is, to provide a bit of context, how the app worked is it was like essentially like a local directory app. So you would go on the app and it had local businesses, and the idea was to connect. It was initially focused on uni students, like how to connect uni students with good deals in the area. But it sort of broadened from there. But it was a directory. You had all of these good deals, and then the sort of revenue approach for the app was to sell advertising in it. So we got the app up and running, and I remember I was able to sell my first advertising spot within the app. It was like $250 to a local bar or a local cafe. And I remember at that point, as soon as that first $250 hit the account, it like sparked something in me where I was like, I have to be all in. Like I have to go all in on this. So I finished up in the sales job, and I just went all in on my $250 app at that point in time.
And I think that, because I kind of remember I also like helped sell a couple of these like advertising spaces. I remember that there was an intrigue, like, about going on an app. Like I remember you could literally just sell people being like, hey, this is going on a local app in Palmerston North, and people would be like, app, oh my god, like, like, yeah, we'll take the space and stuff like that. How did you find like selling the advertising space onto the app?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because, like you said, Palmerston North it's an interesting space. It's very small town vibes. It's not necessarily what you know, it's who you know. So, albeit there was intrigue, there was also a lot of people who would stand off from the idea as well, because there's a lot of businesses in Palmerston North that have been up and running for 14 or 15 years, and they've always done exactly the same thing. They've never changed their approach to marketing. They've never changed their approach to their products or their services. So when something like this came across, there was also a little bit of steer away from this guy because it must be a scam type thing. So there was interest, but there was also a lot of people who just didn't give me the time of day. So yeah, don't get me wrong, it was good, and there was a lot of great conversations that came out of it, but it definitely didn't go as successfully as I had initially visioned it would go.
Well, I do remember this as well, because we definitely had this idea that we would be like millionaires at this point. But I think it would be good for us to walk into, what other interests it sparked that you alluded to there.
Yeah, for sure. So essentially what was happening is I'd gone through the point where I had this a handful of really poor conversations with tech companies in the area, figured out a way to build the app myself, figured out a way to get it up and running. I remember the day we went live, I was like chatting to the Apple people at like 2 a.m. in the morning, and they're like, okay, we'll get the app live. And I was like, oh my God, like this is real, we're about to make it. And then, fast forward 2-3 weeks, it wasn't really like, blowing up per se. But what I was doing was I was having a lot of conversations with business owners, and they were like, yeah, cool app, man. I don't really want to advertise on it, but what I would like is my own app. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. So what it essentially allowed me to sort of see was that other doors were opening. Like my app wasn't necessarily evolving the way that I wanted it to, but there was different doors which were opening up, which is, I think, a very good lesson for not only the tech space, but a very good lesson for life, is that always be open to different avenues and different opportunities. And this initial idea that I had allowed me to open up, what is now, say, Moonward, open up that door.
And I think it would be good for us to talk a little bit about like what's happening in your personal life, during this. You've completely gone all in on a $250 app. I think that you're not probably making more like thousands of dollars instead of tens of thousands of dollars, especially in those first few weeks. Like, what's kind of going on through your head and like in your space and in your environment?
Yeah, it's I think I was fortunate enough to be very naive. I was very naive, which probably made things a bit easier. Yeah. Because I had this. I was still very real in the fact that I had to make sure there was some sort of money coming through the door, or there was some sort of sales process or revenue generation scheme. But I was naive to the fact that I was essentially building a failing business at that point in time. To provide context, the first full year in business, I personally took as a wage $14,000. Like, it's below the poverty line, but it didn't bother me. Like, I figured out a way to live like that. There was a lot of 2-minute noodles, and there was my go-to dinner was like a cheese and ham toasty. What a combo. And it's a great way to lose weight as well. Like if you want to diet, like just
make no money.
No money. But I was just naive to the fact that I didn't really care at that point, because I was enjoying the process so much. Like, it was literally 24 hours around the clock, just like obsessed with building this app, and then eventually building out a business that could build apps for other people.
Passionate. So that's where you found your passion, basically, was in this. Okay, no, that's really great. And I think that maybe dive a little bit more into the businesses that you started chatting to, because I do remember in that space we actually did start talking to some quite large businesses in Palmerston North, or like businesses that actually held like quite a bit of I guess respect in the community. Yeah, it's one of those ones where, once again, like it was just pure, whether it's naivety or passion, that I was just open to chatting to anyone. I was probably quite underqualified. Like, I had only built my own app. I didn't really have a huge amount of runs on the board, but I was still very open to chatting to a lot of people. So like you said, because it's a relatively small city, I was able to get around and chat to quite a lot of people. But don't get me wrong, there's a lot of very, very, very successful businesses that have come out of the city as well, and there still is a lot of successful businesses there. So I was able to get in front of like quite a few really solid businesses. I remember the first real app that we, successfully took off, that we built. It was an app for the New Zealand Grand Prix, which isn't necessarily a large global event, but it's quite a large national event in New Zealand. And what it does do is it then enables you to connect with more people, because usually the people who are in the motorsport space, particularly say like the Grand Prix, which I think is like Formula 3 or something like that, the people who are in that space are usually quite wealthy and are usually business owners as well. So I remember working with, I think it was Michael at the time from Manfield. He's probably one of the first people who gave me like a real good shot. They paid somewhere in the region of $500 to $700 for the app, which is, you think about it now, it's crazy, but as you can see, and as I explained, like, money wasn't a driver. Like, I didn't really care about the value of the services that I was offering from a financial perspective. I was just so engrossed in building apps for other people and helping them sort of
broaden their horizon from a technical point of view. And I remember the day that the New Zealand Grand Prix happened, like they had all of these posters around the racetrack saying download the app, and I was like, oh my god. And I remember looking at my phone, I had like the app stats, like how many downloads we had, and I think we got to like 1,400 downloads in a day or something like that, and I was like, oh my god, we're amazing. But yeah, that was probably the first real business that we engaged in, and once again sort of made me realize like, oh wow, this is a business which has the potential to impact a lot more people.
And I think I remember that Grand Prix day, because I think it went over 2 days, but I remember that Michael like showed up at the gates, like, and he pretty much like snuck us in, like, you know, for free. And I remember, you know, I think that we'll probably post this photo of you and some of the like pictures that were around in this blog that we're going to be doing. But it was such a cool experience. Like I do remember just being like, oh my god, like we've made it, like look at us now. And everyone was listening, like, you know, to the app through their headphones and stuff like that, and they were all, you know, corded at that time, corded headphones back in the day. And you got into the paper, and the local paper for that, and it was so cool. And I think like maybe, did you kind of feel like, because I know that there was definitely a lot of like doubt that was going out around, like, you know, family, friends and all those sorts of things, did you feel like, hey, I'm on the right path now?
Yeah, I think that was some positive, like it was definitely a positive thing. I thought it was really going to snowball from there. I thought like that was my big breakthrough, and it was all going to be downhill, like from a momentum point of view, you know, it was all just going to be plain sailing. Obviously that didn't happen. So it was good. It was nice to get like some sort of recognition for all of the hard work I had done. But it very quickly dawned on me, like you mentioned, the Grand Prix was a 2-day event. I think it dawned on me maybe the Tuesday that I was like, okay, back to the hard work. Like I remember the Monday, I was like, oh my god, we're going to get all of these inquiries, and so many people are going to want apps and that sort of stuff, and it didn't really happen. And on Tuesday I was like, okay, back to the grind. Let's go chat to some business owners and see what we can do.
And I think that that did happen. You know, you were back onto the grind.
Yeah.
I don't know if we want to jump forward a little bit here and talk about what happened when we moved to Australia, because obviously there was a storm brewing in the background, and there was kind of this, you know, we'd kind of picked up a couple more clients, the grind had happened, you know, we'd kind of picked up a few more like $750, $1,000, $2,000 apps. And then, you know, we kind of decided that we wanted a change from Palmerston North, and we moved to Australia.
Yeah, exactly. And what happened just before we moved to Australia is we did some travel over to the UK. And I remember it was like 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. and I was on a Skype call with one of my clients back in New Zealand. And his name was Tommy. We still work with him today. Great friend. And he was just asking me like a few questions in regards to like what I was up to, because he noticed like it was 5 a.m. in the UK and I was on Skype because I was servicing his product, and he was sort of like asking me like, you're putting in all this time and energy, like what are you getting out of it? Are you getting the results that you want? And once again it was like one of those fork in the road moments once again, and there's a lot of them throughout the story, that I sort of realised and understood that maybe Palmerston North wasn't the place for me, or wasn't necessarily the place to grow this business that I wanted to grow. And I think what I've learned is that wasn't necessarily the case, but what was the case is I needed to change my environment, because I could only think to the sort of capacity of my environment, if that makes sense. I really needed to change up my environment to sort of allow me to think a little bit bigger and realize that there's more out there than just the city that you're currently living in at that point in time.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and definitely that trip to the UK was like a good turning point, as you said, because and I think that's just travel in general. Like you go places and you're just like, wow, I'm just nothing like in this city. And I think that in Palmerston North it was kind of like we'd hit a bit of a wall there. So we kind of decided, okay, we're gonna move to Australia. And I know that like in the beginning it was a bit of a struggle. So kind of walk us through that.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the first day I got to Australia. Once again, like the Grand Prix, I thought we'll go to Australia and it'll just go crazy. And I remember the very first day I had no office, I had nowhere to work, and I was working out of the public library in Australia, just like, siphoning their Wi-Fi. And I was like, here we go again. Like, I knew no one. I probably knew two or three people. I knew no business owners. Essentially started a brand new business because you have to start a new entity and whatnot. So I had zero revenue, and like pretty much everything in Australia was more expensive as well. So I was like shit, we've jumped all in, but now it's time to actually make this work. So I did what I think I do best and just started working really hard to once again start chatting to people. And mind you, at this point what I'm doing is I'm chatting to people during the day and then pretty much building their apps and their products at night. So it's more or less like a 24/7 around the clock type thing. And when I was in that mode, there's a lot that has to be put to the side. There's no real like social life, and there's a lot of things like that sort of get put to the side. And because we're fortunate enough to work with a lot of startup business owners these days, like a lot of the time I ask them the question on like, how much do you truly want this? Because there has to be sacrifices along the way, and if they're not willing to sacrifice a few things in their life, then they might not necessarily be the right person, and they might not necessarily be able to get to the point or reach the goal that they want to achieve.
And I think it could be good to kind of talk about, what the business looks like then. Obviously you were talking about like you were wearing so many different hats. Like you were the salesperson, and you were also doing the accounts, and you were also doing the marketing for the business, and you were also building the products and kind of designing them as well. So it was really like you kind of against the world then.
Yeah, so at that point in time, wearing all the hats, and then fast forward a couple of months, I was researching like how businesses grow and scale. Essentially at that point we're an app agency, but it was just me. And the first thing that they say is all you need to do is Google it, is get offshore developers. So I was like, okay, I'll explore this space. So what I started to do was I would go out, chat to people, and then I would get a couple of offshore developers to work with me as well. And all of a sudden I very quickly realized that this offshore developer concept wasn't for me. Because what I had built over that period of time was the whole business was built on relationships. Like I would be comfortable chatting to people, I would chat to people all the time, I would learn about their business, I would learn about what's their dog's name or whatever it might be. I would understand what goal they were trying to achieve or what problem they were trying to solve, and then I was able to actually go and fix that and implement it myself. But as soon as we introduced a couple of offshore developers, and it was literally one or two, there was just this massive disconnect. Like they didn't really care, and they didn't care if they missed a time frame by a couple of days. There was no true connection between the client and the person who was doing the work. So I realized that wasn't working very quickly, and knew that there had to be a drastic change in order for the business to be successful. That there had to be a drastic change, and sort of gets us to the point where essentially you came on board, and we really took quite a big U-turn in our approach to servicing clients.
Yeah, I think that and I can definitely say that I think that the offshoring kind of rubbed wrong against your values as well, because you've always said that you were very passionate, and you didn't care about working for money and like all of these sorts of things, and then to kind of introduce like this other party into the business that was passionless, was working for money. I feel like that really kind of rubbed wrong against you, and that's where obviously I came on board and joined, which what was Connect at the time.
Yeah.
So maybe just like kind of walk us through like what that like 6 months, whatever it was, looked like from there.
Yeah, so from here we actually went through quite a massive transition process. We'd gone from servicing a lot of small, medium-sized businesses, like we were looking after mum, dad businesses, small, medium-sized businesses, nothing like super extravagant. And what we did is we were able to pivot at that point in time and double down on what we really enjoyed working on. And what I realized what I really enjoyed working on was like really fresh business ideas or really fresh projects. And in turn, we started to attract a lot of like startup businesses as well, which is something that we were really, really passionate about, was seeing someone come to us with an idea or a concept and turn it into a fully fledged business. It's now I like explain the story. It's funny, like why? Because obviously I had gone through that process where I had a thought, I had an idea, and I went through the process of turning it into a fully fledged business. And I think why I'm able to resonate with particularly our clients so much is because I've been in their shoes, but more so what I believe I can offer to them is I can sort of help them avoid the mistakes that I made to try and speed up the process from idea to successful business. So we went through that sort of U-turn process and started to build out our in-house team here at Moonward, knowing that the experience that we had had previously was, previously with offshore developers was drastically different to the experience that we wanted to provide our clients.
Because I remember sort of when I joined as well, initially I was the designer, and you were still developing and selling and all of those sorts of things as well. And quickly we just got a lot of work on, and we kind of identified that the next best hire for us would be another designer. And I remember that for you and I, like that was, I would say, probably one of the biggest steps we've ever taken in this entire business. Like not even getting the office, not even like all of these other like crazy things that we've done. I feel like for us that was the biggest mental block, was being like, okay, we're going to hire a person. Like
Agreed.
yeah
By far the biggest barrier, because what I knew is like if it was just me, like I would figure out a way. I would just figure out a way to like make it work, because you do that. But as soon as you involve like someone else who has a life, who has they have family, or they have a rent that they need to pay, or whatever it might be, like it's full on. And I definitely remember the first hire, and probably a couple of weeks after we hired them, like everything seemed to be going to plan. The business wasn't closing like everyone thinks would happen. And I probably 2 weeks after that hire, I think we both knew that, like, this is a people business. Like we need more people in the business to help us not only service our clients better, but to help us grow and go to the next stage. So I think it was pretty soon after that we got our first developer on board as well. And
I remember what we noticed as well when we made that first hire. Obviously, shout out Lockie, he's just recently done a video if you guys want to check that out. But the quality of our work just went up so much. Like I remember, and I feel that we really like fell on our feet when we got Lockie in, because the designs that he started making, although he also had his own like UI UX journey to go on, just looked amazing. And it really like raised the bar for us. And then, as you said, when we actually got like our first developer, and then shortly after our second developer, the quality of our work was just like incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. It was almost like we always went with the hiring philosophy of people first, and we're very fortunate that we have great people in the team. The way we hire is, the person, their attitude and their approach to work is extremely important. Obviously, they have to have a certain level of skills, but the great thing about skills is you can always grow them and improve them over time if you have the right attitude. And we just hired people with an amazing attitude, an attitude where they were coming to work to grow themselves, grow the business, and help our clients achieve amazing things as well. And it's sort of, after those first couple of hires, it sort of pushed that snowball and grew that snowball even bigger.
And I remember a little while ago when obviously we'd got our first designer, and then we had our first developer, and then our second developer, and then we hired our third developer. And I remember because we were working out of like a co-working space. And we were quickly knocking down walls. We were really growing at a crazy rate. And for us, we just thought oh my God, we cannot keep up with how much people we need to hire to sort of service our work as well.
Yeah, it was amazing. We got to this point where we had this co-working space. It was this tight, and they give you an allocated little office. And it was this tiny little office. I think it was designed for maybe 4 or 5 people. I think at our capacity we maybe had 8 or 9. And there was this funny transition period because we were negotiating this lease, and we had an interim space ready to go, but the lawyer was taking ages. The lawyer was ripping this lease apart, and there was all these delays, and we got to the point where we hired another person. And we had this 5-person office. We had 9 people in there. We literally had one of our employees sitting on the floor at one point. We're we're trying to figure it out. But then obviously we were able to move into the new space. So we literally grew beyond our old office, which was quite cool.
And I think it's really cool to talk on that because we joke about it often. But we did actually have an employee who still works there, Rebecca, who I'm sure that you'll do a chat with later. She literally sat on the floor, and we talk about this often. It's just she loved the business. She really loved what we were doing here, the apps and that we were working with the clients and stuff like that. And I think that, as you said, this is a people business. So how did we kind of get someone who was just graduated and all this sort of stuff and has a very big life ahead of them to literally sit on the floor in a business and just work for a vision?
Whether it's business, whether it's personal life, whatever it is, there has to be, you have to have something bigger than yourself that you're aiming for, and I think at that point in time as a business, that's what we were doing really well, is we had this really big vision and everyone was on board. Because we were still really small at that point in time, there wasn't really room for people not to be on board, because everyone was involved in projects. Everyone had to work really hard. There was such a unique culture that we built, where we were all just laser focused on heading in the direction of growing the business, growing our clientele, helping our clients achieve amazing things, scaling up the level of clients that we were working with. Everyone was just on board, and albeit the environment wasn't perfect, we all knew that because we were working together as a team, we were putting ourselves in a position to scale up. And what I love about that situation is it wasn't just talk. We've seen it, that whenever everyone bands together, we're able to scale up, whether it's getting a new office, whether it's going from working with a certain clientele to more of a corporate or an enterprise level clientele, or working with little startup businesses to highly funded startup businesses. And we've seen it that when everyone sort of bands together as a team, and we've all got this laser focused, or we're all laser focused on this particular vision, that the results are truly amazing. And we noticed that that culture that we built when we were at 4 or 5 people is the same culture that we're at now, where we're at 17 people, 18 people, 19 people, and it's the, like I mentioned at the start, on our hiring process and how we get people on board. It's exactly the same culture that we'll carry through, no matter how big the company grows.
So more of that like focus on soft skills, like over hard skills.
100%, yeah.
And I think it could be good to talk a little bit more about, the next big step, which was obviously moving into an office. Like, I think that when we were talking about this office, it was kind of like the business was official. We felt like, oh my God, we have really arrived here, like on this app space.
Yeah, it's a funny one. I remember when we moved into this office, I think we were walking around the building and someone came up to me and were like, oh, how long have you guys been around for? Like, you must be a new business. And it's like that classic, overnight success. It had taken me 7 years to be an overnight success at that point in time. So absolutely, when we got to this point, I remember when we looked at the office for the first time, we were like, oh, there's no way in this world that we'll be able to afford it. Like, these are real businesses in here. Like, we definitely can't afford it. And then we started breaking down the numbers, and we're like, I think we can do this. I think we can do this. And we're like, it'll be a little bit risky, but we can figure out a way. And we just set ourselves some KPIs. We set ourselves a goal for the next month, and if we hit that, we knew we were capable of continuing to grow and continuing to get to the point where we could have an office like this, and really, call ourselves a real business. So I think what happened there is, once again, it just comes back to that laser focus. Like, we really wanted to achieve something, and it goes right back to what I said at the start. Like, when I get my mind set on things, like I just jump all in, and there was no real alternative. Like I didn't want to tell myself like, oh, I wasn't able to get the business to a point where we could afford an office, or we could be in an office like this. So we just jumped all in and figured out a way to make it work.
And I think that it is really cool. It could be cool to touch as well on, what was happening in your personal life as well, because I know that, we'd gone from the situation where people were just like, oh my God, why is Andrew doing this? Like, he's 18, 19 and he's, started a business and it's not successful. Like, it's kind of like, as you said, a failing business to kind of go and to scale up. In the space of about, 2 to 3 years, really, everything kind of happens at once. And then, we've got this office and we've got, 18 team members working with us. What was kind of going on there?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think, like you said at the start, everyone, I think a lot of people just thought I was going through a phase. I was just going through a phase. Let him do what he's doing, and he'll snap out of it and get a real job at some point. Like, that's the narrative that was sort of happening, and I just constantly told myself that if you just keep working hard, like, it will figure itself out. Like, we'll get to a point where we can figure this out. And it's tough, don't get me wrong, but I think you have to be really picky on the type of people that you have in your circle. Like, I'll be very transparent with the fact that I've got quite a small, like, inner circle of people. And the reason being is I want to make sure that the people I'm chatting with are on board, if that makes sense. I don't want people dragging me down or saying like, oh, you're stupid, or that's a silly thing to do, you're being selfish, whatever it is. So it was definitely tough, but it's that classic thing. When we got to a point where we were in an office like this, everyone's like, oh my God,
you've made it.
You're doing so well.
Yeah.
And now it's like the opposite, because now you have to still block that out, because you don't, within reason, because you don't necessarily want to just, start cruising and all of a sudden the business isn't going well. So there's definitely a balancing act there.
Yeah. And I think it's a really good point that you mentioned before as well, how you were talking about, like, you've always been someone that, like, loves the challenge. I think that when we've been hiring people, we've always hired people who also love the challenge. And as you said, like, even though we had 5 people that were 100% on board, then we had 10 people that were 100% on board, and now we've got, like, 18, 19 people. I still feel like everyone's 100% on board, like, you know, with the vision, you know, and even though we've got this office, there's always like, you know, well, what's the next step? Like, you know, we'll go bigger, like, and we'll get bigger clients and, you know, all of these sorts of things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's always constant is whether, you know, we were a small team or a big team, there's always a challenge. There's always something that you're trying to evolve and improve, whether it's an internal system, whether it's a technical challenge, whether it's a communication challenge or whatever it is. Like, there's always something that you can improve. And like you mentioned before, with the type of people that were brought on board, because the interview process or our hiring process that we go through, because we're really focused on getting great people, we know that when there is a challenge, they're the type of people who will step up. And they're not the people who will, you know, walk away from a challenge and be like, oh no, I don't get paid enough to look after that, or that's not in my job description. It's people who are just fully open and ready to like embrace challenges. And I think that's why we've been able to keep moving in a really solid direction, because don't get me wrong, the skills are really important, the quality of work is really important, but when you combine that with an amazing attitude, and that, in my opinion, that stems from us as sort of like, you know, people who've been in the business the longest and the other sort of originals who've been in the business the longest, it just ends up populating everyone else, and it's just the culture. Like, it's like, that's just how they do it at Moonward. Like, that's their approach.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great point. I think a good way to kind of wrap up would be, like, what would you tell maybe like young Andrew, or, you know, someone who is starting their own very ambitious journey?
Yeah, great question. I would say, first of all, back yourself. I guess life's short, and, you know, I'm pretty sure we only get one go at it. I said this with Liv when I was chatting to Liv, and I got this bit of advice from a good friend of mine, and he said, never lose sleep on a decision you didn't make. And what that basically means is that don't regret not jumping or not making a decision. And I think a lot of people, I think that there's a study out there somewhere, and I need to get the numbers on this, but I think they did a study on people when they're on their death's beds, like, what's their biggest regret, and it's usually a decision that they didn't make, or I wish I started that business, or I wish I pursued that idea, or I wish I you know, spoke to my friends more, or whatever it was. I think that's, you know, the biggest thing I see is, like, just back yourself and be open to saying yes to opportunities and challenges, because there's always going to be a way to figure it out and go about it. But in order to you know, put yourself into that position, you first have to say yes, and you first have to back yourself.
I think that's a really great way to wrap up. I know that you're a very busy man, so we won't keep you for too much longer, but thank you very much for the chat today. And obviously, guys, like and subscribe, you know, for more videos as well. I think we'll all be pleased to know that Rebecca now has a desk, so we don't have to worry about
Everyone's
that.
got desks.
Everyone has a desk now. But yeah, no, thank you for your time, and yeah, like and subscribe for more. Thanks, guys.